So, it is March, in case you didn't know. I'm still kind of confused. And our theme this month is cultivating authenticity, which is part of our year-long series about living out loud. So we get to explore the practice, because it truly is a practice of cultivating authenticity and living a life of integrity, in order to express the fullness of who we are and who we are here to be in this world. So Brene Brown offers this definition as kind of the basis of authenticity that we are talking about. And she says, authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are. Yes. So it's not about becoming anything other than who we already are, but it does require a little bit of work, a little self-reflection to notice the ways in which we are putting up those barriers or blocks to revealing our authentic selves. And last week we talked about dropping the masks, right? This idea of mask or certain personas that we may put on that perhaps may provide a little comfort or safety instead of revealing who we are. But there is so much power when we begin to recognize when we are wearing those masks and then can choose to be who we truly are instead of showing up in these other ways, often to please those around us or somehow get approval or acceptance. So, I shared one of mine being this people-pleasing Patty, which Patty and I had some discussion about. I was like, I named this persona well before I met you. And, so I encourage you all to look at what are some of your personas and maybe name them, Nervous Nellie, Strong Stanley, whatever it may be. So there's something about coming up with these fun names that can bring some humor, that can bring some levity to these topics that, sometimes could feel shameful, right? Or we could feel embarrassed or judge ourselves for ways that we are being inauthentic. But it's human nature. So practicing that level of self-awareness allows us then to release those patterns and masks and attitudes and thoughts and behaviors, all the ways that we act as barriers to our authentic self, and that keep us from standing in our truth and power. Ernest Holmes is the founder of the Science of Mind teaching, which is our core teaching here at Ahava, and he says, the divine pattern would be imperfect without you. Dare to be yourself. Stand in wonder before the majesty and might, the beauty and the power of the divine presence which seeks to express through your individual life. So I love how just bold Dr. Holmes is in reminding us to stand in the boldness of who we are, because we are truly that vessel for spirit to shine and to know itself more fully through each of us in a unique way. We are all worthy, powerful beings with so many unique gifts and talents to share with this world. And what a display we saw last night with those performers showing up in their authentic expression and revealing the artistry of drag. And if you missed it, don't worry, we will be doing it again. What last night showed us is that there is a need for a space outside of the bar scene for people to come together in all ages to celebrate and to experience this culture of drag. And it has very deep roots in Lexington as well. So I am just particularly honored to be able to provide that space to the Lexington community. So more to come, don't you worry. Yes. So, when We are living by other people's ideals or standards, when we are afraid to stand in our own power or worth based on all of these ideas outside of ourselves, we can start to forget who we are and get lost. You know, some of us may get lost in a particular relationship or job, or caught up in some expectations of the world that is not authentic to who we are. So we have this opportunity now to wake up, to pay attention, and to notice where we are out of alignment with our authentic self-expression. And then from there, to do the work to really get back to who we are, to come home to ourselves and to ask ourselves what we value, what we love. And then that brings us to this week's topic around boundaries. Because once we know and discover this for ourselves, it's a whole other thing to begin to start to communicate that with others, to allow others to know the truth of who we are and how to be in relationship with us through how we communicate our needs and desires and expectations. And that's what we mean by boundaries. Right? Boundaries, this word has so many different meanings, and it could be seen as like a wall or a block or something. Like, I don't want boundaries because, I don't want to be separate from anything or anyone. That's not the kind of boundary we're talking about. We are talking about boundary as actually a doorway as opposed to a wall. A doorway that lets others know how to engage with us. A doorway to allow someone safely to enter our space and our inner circle, where we can be vulnerable and authentic and share who we are. But we have to let people know. So boundaries are where we end and another begins. And in her book, Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free, author Nancy Levine says, boundaries are a limit that you set to define what you will or will not do, or what you will or will not accept or tolerate from others. So if you desire to express yourself authentically, then we have to become familiar with what we desire, what we do tolerate and allow into our space. And it's different for everyone. So we can't assume, because the way we walk in the world and like to, communicate, or how close we like to stand, or how we like to be touched, or any of those things, we can't assume that the way we walk through the world is how others walk through the world. There are 7, almost 8 billion now, maybe, people in the world, and there's that many ways of walking on this planet. So having clarity about our boundaries empowers us to then know who we are and who we are to be in this world and how to relate to others. So we have to be able to communicate clearly a healthy boundary and to understand what that is in order to then hold others accountable. Because we can't expect others to honor our boundaries if we don't let them know. Something we say often here, no expectation without agreement. It's that same concept. And we may not always feel comfortable sharing our boundaries. It could feel perhaps selfish, or that we're being seen as being, difficult or annoying or too much or asking too much, or, perhaps even seen as unspiritual to have a boundary. And these are all the things that we have to start to deconstruct from our collective consciousness, these ideas that we have about boundaries, in order to know that it is still our responsibility to clearly know and communicate our boundaries in order to have a deeper, more intimate, healthy relationship. So letting others know also prevents us from being stepped on, right? It creates a bridge instead of a doormat or a block, and gives others that pathway, that clear understanding on how to connect with us. It also prevents others from stepping on any unexpected landmines that they didn't even know were there. By crossing boundaries they didn't even know were there. So this is why it is important to begin to look at this work of boundaries. And there are many resources. I always like to share, do the research, look up the podcast, get the books, and I'm happy to drop some links later for some of those, as well as the workshop this afternoon. We'll go into that. But from a spiritual perspective, the purpose of life is to express itself through us, yes? And as spiritual beings, we are all this individualization of the source energy with our own unique intentions and desires. So we all have unique boundaries, whether they be physical or mental, emotional, energetic, material. And when we live in the world, either with a lack of boundaries or this kind of very loose understanding of boundaries, it can unconsciously tell others that we don't hold anything sacred, right? That we are always at the whim of others' beings, that we exist just for their taking, and this can lead to, of course, resentment, anger, betrayal, all of those things. And everyone, I feel like there's kind of like a spectrum, like everything, it's so fluid, that some people, whether it be from, how they're raised, circumstances, or just something unique about their beingness or personality, range anywhere from this kind of like no boundaries, loose boundaries, to very rigid boundaries. And so for all of us to start to look at our lives and to notice where we are on the spectrum, and maybe with certain relationships or certain places we're really clear, maybe some places we're gotten a little too rigid because we've built up that resentment, so our boundaries are more of a wall. And are there places, or are there those of us that live more in this, I don't even know what I want or need because I've spent my whole life just saying yes and being accommodating and maintaining this nice people-pleasing persona. So this week, I've shared this before, like whatever the topic is, it like does a number on my life. So I've been really looking at, this, and it's become very clear how loose my boundaries are and how it can be scary for me to state that and to stand firm in that, because that was how I was raised and never taught, I didn't have it modeled to me that it's okay to say no, period, without an explanation, without a da-da-da-da-da, and that doesn't mean that I am being mean, and it's like, yeah, I can get this intellectually, but then I start to really look at my behaviors or certain things and notice how ingrained it is, when somebody asks me something, it's that instant, like, yeah, sure. And then it may be like days later where I realize, like, why did I say yes to that? So it's getting to that point of awareness to just pause and state the boundary, like, let me think about that, or let me get back to you. Or get to the point where eventually I can feel in my body in that moment, like, is this a yes, or is this a no? And to stand firm in that, because it all really comes back to our own self-worth and self-value. Like, do I value myself enough to honor my time, to honor my boundaries and my body and my mental space and my energy? I was joking with a friend. I texted her a couple days ago, and then she wrote me back, I think yesterday, sorry, I didn't get back to you just yet. I was, doing this show or whatever. And she's an Irish dancer, which is super cool. So obviously, St. Patrick's Day was a thing. And then I wrote back, I was like, oh, no worries. I am hosting a drag show, preparing to run a service in the morning, work on a talk, and lead a workshop on boundaries. Obviously, I need to look at perhaps my boundaries with my time. Not to mention, I'll talk about it later, but the class that was supposed to start, we postponed it. Look, grace and space, right? Giving myself some grace and space to push that off another week. Anyway, so I'm just saying that I'm letting you into the doorway of my life, right? That, as a spiritual leader, that doesn't mean that I am somehow floating through this world untouched. And, also to just be like, I may stumble through it, but I'm going to be working on setting some more boundaries, especially, with my time and energy. And so for all of us, and I just have to say one more thing, it seems like, at least in my experience, that those of us with more loose boundaries often are attracted to those with more rigid boundaries as a wonderful learning opportunity. Does anyone else notice that? And perhaps if you're the rigid or the more comfortable saying no, you're like, why does this person just tell me what they want, right? So, and for most of you who know my wife, Heather, if you've had any, interactions with her, you will see like she is so firm on clear on what she needs to, say no to. And I'm like, wow. So anyway, just another little antidote there. So we need to communicate our boundaries because unfortunately people can't read our minds. Even people that we have known and been in intimate relationship for 20 years. We can't make the assumption that everyone knows me, so they should know this about me. And it doesn't absolve us from the responsibility to continue to communicate our boundaries. And guess what? They may change because we are always growing. It is the nature of life expressing through us to always be evolving and growing. So as frustrating as it may be sometimes, we have to take the time to reevaluate our boundaries, and perhaps we will have a new boundary, requested from someone we loved that has changed. And how do we be willing to be accepting and compassionate of that for others and ourselves? And it gives the opportunity to practice courage and vulnerability and self-love as we stand in our power and our authenticity, yes? To know that sharing who we are is a gift, and sharing our boundaries, or if it helps you to think of them as our needs or our desires or our wants, really gives others the opportunity to connect with us on a deeper way. Taking time to familiarize ourselves, to get to know what our limits are, what are our non-negotiables. This is a practice in self-discovery and self-awareness. And then once you know what you value, you can begin to then communicate and create those healthy boundaries. So, what can get in our way from doing this essentially is years of, outside messaging or practice or, just patterns of how we have communicated. And it really is a communication style that we can wake up to and to check in with ourselves to begin to embrace a more authentic, vulnerable way of communicating with love and with kindness, knowing that what we desire is to love and be loved, to be seen, to be known, to be heard. And it's up to us to teach people how to treat us. Yes? Brene Brown in The Gifts and Imperfections says, when we fail to set boundaries and hold people accountable, we feel used or mistreated. And this is why we sometimes attack those this is why sometimes attack, this is why we sometimes attack, here we go, sorry. Woo, I didn't sleep much after last night, y'all. I'm running on some steam, but it's happening. Okay, I can read. This is why we sometimes attack who they are, which is far more hurtful than addressing a behavior or a choice. So I'm going to read all that again. When we fail to set boundaries and hold people accountable, we feel used and mistreated. And this is why we sometimes attack who they are, which is far more hurtful than addressing the actual behavior or the choice. So we can begin to separate people's actions and behaviors from like the essence of their being for ourselves and others. This is an act of compassion, an act of grace, and it removes the shame and judgment out of that relationship, whether it be with ourselves or others. So what I want you to leave today with is simple. No is a complete sentence. Right? Knowing our values and our limits empowers us to live in alignment with them, to be able to say yes to our yeses, and to be able to hold firm in our sacred no's. And to create that loving path or doorway to allow people in to experience a deeper, more intimate connection with us. We don't have to add all the story, all the fluff around our no. We can simply say no, not now, whatever it may be. So I'm working on that, y'all, because, it's a different way of communicating. And, what happens when we begin to say yes when we mean no, we're compromising again ourselves in order to please or comfort someone else. So honoring our boundaries is an act of self-love, and it's when we get to say yes to honoring and loving who we are, and to teach people how to treat us by sharing and communicating what our boundaries are. So it's time to uncover our personal boundaries in order to embrace the fullness of who you are through compassionate self-inquiry, perhaps journaling, meditation, working with a spiritual practitioner or a spiritual coach to get clear on your values, your desires, your boundaries, and to get a clearer picture of what really matters to you uniquely in your life. Authenticity is a practice, but we can start right now to begin again, to begin anew, forgiving ourselves from anything in the past, releasing the shame and judgment, and embracing the love and full acceptance of who we are. Loving ourselves and others, to be brave enough to say, this is what I will, and this is what I will not do or tolerate. This builds bridges of connections, and it is how we get to live out loud. Yes? All right, let's take it into prayer. So let's just begin by taking that nice deep breath. And checking in with our physical body in this moment. Noticing any sensations, hot spots, cold spots, itching, aching, tingling. Connecting with our physical body such that we can begin to recognize and listen for what it needs. As well as then moving into this awareness of our emotional or feeling state. Are we feeling tender, open, vulnerable? Are we feeling rigid, scared, angry. Simply noticing without judgment, but becoming aware of what our feelings may indicate about our needs and desires, our boundaries, where they have or have not been perhaps communicated, where they have or have not been shared and honored. And taking a moment to check in with our thoughts. Are we ruminating on something? Are we feeling a resistance or a judgment to something that is occurring, as opposed to simply noticing it is what it is? Where are our thoughts leading us to do the work on honoring our needs and desires? So taking another deep breath. This simple practice is one that we can begin to integrate into our lives, moment by moment, day by day, as needed. Checking in, becoming aware. So again, we breathe now. Clearing, releasing. Allowing the breath to bring us into this now present moment, where we know and recognize the one life that is love, that is peace, that is joy, that is harmony, that is clarity. This one life that is the very essence and nature of the universe, that which some call God, Spirit, life. It is who I am. It is the very essence and nature and truth of each and every being. And as this is true for each of us, we can stand in the power and the awareness and the clarity and the joy and the beauty of life expressing itself in, as, and through us. For what is true of spirit must be true of us, for it is who we are. So I affirm right here, right now, speaking in the I on behalf of all of us, that I am willing to speak my sacred no. I am willing to clearly communicate my needs and wants and desires. I embrace clarity and self-awareness, self-love, and self-worth to stand in the wholeness and integrity of my being. I am clear. I know who I am. I know what is mine to do. I know what I need and want and desire in order to express the fullness of who I am in this wonderful world, in relationship with others. To stand firmly in my unique power and presence, and to open that door to invite people lovingly into my heart, releasing shame and judgment and fear and doubt and unworthiness, and standing and claiming and knowing self-love, unconditional love is who I am. I am worthy, I am whole, I am complete, I am clear, I am free. I am joy personified. Yes, and for this I am grateful, so grateful to know that this word is done as I release it into the universe, the law of the universe that always says, yes, 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 my beloved, it is done. It is so. And so it is. And so it is.